Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 155. Thank you for joining us. In preparation for Armed Forces Day and in honor of our veterans and active service members, we are releasing 2 episodes covering military service. Today, Kolbe's Krysten Pizzurro and John Bates, former service members, join us to share their experiences in the military. With great insight into the benefits and challenges of military service, Krysten and John also provide assistance in how to discern whether military service is right for the student and what avenues exist to join should the student determine that service is what God is calling them to. To Krysten and John, our veterans and active service members, thank you for your service. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Well, we are happy to welcome back a couple of friends of the Kolbecast. They've been with us on a number of episodes. We have John Bates, Kolbe's project manager, and Krysten Pizzurro, one of our academic advisors. Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Hey, Bonnie. Hey, Stephen.
Hi, everybody. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Glad to see you guys. Thanks for joining us. Our conversation today is part of our Life After Kolbe series, which has its own tag on the Kolbe website so that listeners can check out other episodes we've done that relate to the prospect of life once the Kolbe days are finished. So our show notes will have a link to that page with the filters so listeners can check out other episodes we've done on the topic. There are a number of them now, growing collection. So we're adding to it today, and our next episode as well will be a continuance of the conversation we're having today. So that is relating to aspects of discerning military service after the Kolbe days are finished, whether that has been on a student's mind for a long time or has just kind of come up recently, or if it has not come up at all. We thought we would discuss that today. We touched on a little bit in a conversation with Celeste Cuellar several episodes back. I'll link that. She discussed her own service and some things around that at that time, but we're going to delve more deeply today. So today we have John and Krysten, as I have said. Let's hand it over to them so they can tell us a bit about their own service. Krysten, we'll start with you. Would you give us an overview of your military background and experience and kind of what drew you to that?
Sure. I served for 5 years active duty in the Coast Guard. I went to the Coast Guard Academy for college prior to that. And then I did 2 years in the Coast Guard Reserves. I kind of stumbled upon the Coast Guard Academy. I wandered into my guidance counselor's office, or like the career counseling office, as a junior, and I was interested in marine biology. I lived in Hawaii. That's where I grew up. And he was like, hey, this place, the Coast Guard Academy, is actually one of the number 1 in the nation, and they have a summer program. And it's called AIM, and it's an introductory, you spend a week there living like you would as a freshman to see if it's something you'd want to do. So I applied, did the interview process, got in, did that, and I loved it. It's up in Connecticut, and I decided that was where I wanted to go. And so that kind of started that process. And so I ended up going to the academy, getting my degree through there, and then serving my time active duty.
So did you have family members who had served in one way or another before that? Was that familiar to you in some way?
Yes. Both my grandfathers served, one in the Korean War and one in the Vietnam War in the beginning. And then my dad did 30 years active duty in the Navy. That was why we were in Hawaii. So it just, I guess you could say it was in my blood. Yeah.
When you went to that summer program, was that your first time traveling that far from home?
Yes, because my family was all the way in Hawaii. So I was really far away, and they put me on a plane, and I was like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, that would be, yeah. Okay, John, what about you?
Thanks for having me on this podcast. I decided to join the Army because I had squandered every prospect and every opportunity I had in public high school. I was a very below average student, barely passing, barely making the grade. And if it weren't for the grace of the teachers and the support of the friends that I made in my senior year, I probably wouldn't have finished. but having no prospects or not building any college prospects or life after high school, I just thought, what could I do? Because I certainly didn't know what type of person I was, but what could I do? And the recruiter came and knocking. It's like, okay, it sounds good. I didn't give any other thoughts. It was the first person to come talk to me, and it didn't seem like a bad opportunity. And obviously God had put that opportunity in my pathway. So from that moment on, I spent 25 years in the military and retired as a chief warrant officer 5. So I enlisted, but ended up as one of the highest ranking warrant officers in my field. Krysten, you had military service in your blood and in your family, and I didn't. I came out of rural Alabama, and a very on the low end of let's see, low end of the medium class, maybe depends on your perspective. And I didn't learn that my grandpa had had been part of World War II until I was getting ready to retire and sorting through all of his things, after his passing. So I didn't know I had that military service in, but I didn't have anyone else to show me the way or like try to talk me into it. I did have a neighbor friend who he also was in World War II, and I would just talk to him. He really wouldn't say like, "Hey, you should do this," or maybe consider this. I would just talk to him about it, and if he didn't object, I'm like, "Okay, well, your silence is kind of tacit approval, so I'm going to go join the military." Um, the one thing that the Army taught me throughout is it's problem rich and opportunity rich, and that's where I've really learned to develop who I am and what I was meant to do and who I was meant to be. So I've gone from all over the world in 25 years. You possibly could hit every country and where the military is even occupying or has a presence at. But I've been on both coasts in the United States. I've been to Germany, Korea. At one point, I served on presidential duty and spent 4 years as a communications officer for the president. And then afterwards, you keep finding new opportunities and working your way up. And I ended working for the Chief of Staff of the Army, developing concepts and working on projects that helped advance the military service. My last station was in Virginia, and then this is where we discerned that it was time to give back and do something different for the benefit of our students and our kids. And because we're military, we homeschooled the entire time through Kolbe. And thanks to Krysten, who turned us on to Kolbe. And because it was such a great program for our kids, and Kolbe was experiencing a period of growth because of COVID, the opportunity was placed there again for me by God. We were looking for advisors, and that's how Chris and I got on.
It seems like that military community, that's small. Like we often say like the Catholic world is so small. Military seems very much like that. So you guys go back a ways, right? You've been friends for a while.
Yeah, we're stationed in the same base together, and Chris and I found each other at PE one day at our homeschool co-op and just started talking, and then we started meeting on Tuesdays to say the rosary together with all the crazy kids running around us as we tried to pray. And yeah, and it's funny, like the Hoxies have been to the space and the Treats, and so it's transient, and yet you make kind of lifelong friendships. So.
And Chris is going to join us for our next conversation. John's wife,
I
Chris,
love it.
and she's been with us before, so we look forward to talking to her again. Okay, well, let's have you guys give us some things to think about. Perhaps we have someone in our household, a young person who has already voiced an interest in military service of one kind or another, or hasn't yet, but it's just sort of, we're broaching that prospect today. What are some things you guys would point out for us to think about as families? Where would we start with something like that?
guess I could go in two different directions, and John, just jump in if you think of something else. Or so for academy wise, if you are thinking that you're worried about either money and you aren't sure how you're going to pay for college, if you want something where you will be focused and stay on track and have a set schedule, those were the things that drew me to the academy initially, because I grew up in an enlisted family, and we didn't have that extra money for college, and that was okay. I knew that going into it. And so the academy filled several spots for me. They were very like, hey, we pay for you to go to college. We pay you while you go to college, and then you have a job right after it. And those really fit with me. And I am a regimented person anyway. My poor kids. I'm a box checker by nature. I tell my families, my advising families that all the time. And I had to kind of be broken of that as I started to homeschool. But the academies all keep you in a straight line. Like there's not a whole lot of room for straying, and that's okay. Like you have to be focused and study because you don't want to be kicked out.
True.
So
Okay.
those are some things to consider. And I don't have very much insight on the enlisted side, other than I think some people are looking also still for some regimented, and they want to make sure that they, I don't know, have a path to follow.
Yeah. Does that seem pretty common trait among those who come to the academies? They thrive in that regimented structure, or they need it. They recognize their need for it.
Yes, either. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I know when I was a younger high school student, I was thinking, oh, I'd like to be an aeronautical engineer. And I was looking at the Air Force Academy. And at that time, at least, I was a little overwhelmed by the amount of work that I needed to do, because it's like, oh, I should probably try to become an Eagle Scout, and I need to get a representative to write a recommendation or something. Is it still like that in some of the branches, or does it vary?
So I chose the one academy that does not require a nomination. The Coast Guard Academy is, I'm going to put some bragging rights here. It is one of the hardest in the nation to get into, and like it's up there with Harvard. And part of it is because you get on your own merit, and it's like pasted all over the website of the Coast Guard Academy, because you don't have to ask for a Senate nomination. So all the other academies do require it. But I wouldn't let that deter you. Like if you are determined to do an academy, ask or reach out, like even use the advisors, and we can help you figure out who to talk to. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do that. So yes, they still do require that nomination from a senator, but they're available. So, but the Coast Guard Academy does not.
Well, I think that if I could kind of dissect a little bit what Krysten said, there's actually multiple pathways to get into the military, and the academy is one of them, and one of the best ways of getting in. But there's only so many slots to get into each academy each year, and it's very competitive, as Krysten said, especially when you have to seek out a letter of recommendation from your representative. And with things being so competitive, just like with all these top-ranked colleges lately, you're starting that journey back in 10th grade of your high school year, and not a lot of students are still trying to find themselves and figure out what type of person they want to be, and not all of them are that determined and that focused and that assured of where they want to go. So what I would say is, don't be deterred if you can't follow the academy track, because there's always ROTC within many colleges around the nation. Most colleges have an ROTC program. There are military academies like a VMI, of Virginia Military Institute, and each state has a military institute, I believe. Please don't fact check me on that. But it's more of a direct application process versus representative intervention and this massive portfolio that you've amassed for yourself to make you the best candidate. Military institutes are a way to go. ROTC is a way to go. And if you can't get in through that way, then there's always the enlisted route. And right now, in our current environment, an enlisted pathway is very lucrative to somebody who may not have the money to put into a college education yet. So they're offering bonuses left and right, even more so than when I joined. The enlisted pathway allows you to learn a trade. And as I was saying earlier in the intro, opportunities will present themselves because large bureaucracies are inherently problem rich. And if you can tackle big problems, then those opportunities will open new doors for you. So there are other pathways to officership, or maybe staying enlisted is what you want to do.
Officer candidate schools, another way to do that. That is kind of similar to ROTC, right? You get your degree first, and that can be community college in the beginning, finishing up at a 4-year university, and then you apply to do this. It's a 6-week. I don't know that it's 6 weeks everywhere, but for the Coast Guard, it's like 6 weeks. They do it up at the academy, and they train you how to be an officer, and then you go off into the fleet. So that is also like, there are many pathways to get into the military and to have a military career. I mean, we have the chaplaincy corps, right? So if you are discerning to be a priest, you can become a priest and then join the military that way and serve military as a priest. You can become a doctor or a nurse and serve in the physician's corps and go in the military, and you hop around services that way. I mean, there are many pathways, and that can get confusing. But at the same time, if one way doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean that the doors are shut forever. I think that's probably what John was trying to get at as well.
Yeah, I remember some of my college classmates kind of getting ready, and maybe it was officer, but they were starting to do push-ups and do some running and things like that. Is that like the officer sort of training that you need to do that, or is that generally there's some sort of physical requirements that you're going to have to meet?
I would say that if you're discerning the military in any pathway, in any field, start working on your physical fitness now. There are recent reports that the military writ large has problems with recruiting because so many kids who are joining are so out of shape that it's taking longer to get them into the basic shape. I would say just start now. I mean, you should always focus on your health, and you should always try to improve your physical fitness. But if you're seriously discerning the military in any way, shape, or form, start working on those push-ups, sit-ups, and running.
And we can count that for high school physical education credit with our Kolbe enrollment, right? Okay.
Absolutely. Most recruiting stations, especially if you go enlisted, your first step, if you're not going direct through a military academy, is a recruiting station. And those recruiting stations are all often multi-service. So it's an Armed Force Career Center. And either of the services will tell you when you're interested, like, hey, let's start meeting more regularly. Let's start working on our physical fitness together. Let's start working on forming those habits that will make you successful to get to that initial stage of military service.
Okay.
When I first joined, I had never ran more than a mile at any given time when I first joined. And it was such a shock because that was the very first thing we did. It was just completely early in the morning. We're learning how to like dress in our uniforms. And the very next thing was, all right, we're going on a run. And here I am just sucking wind the entire time and like side stitch, like, I can't believe this is what I'm doing. My legs hurt. I had never ran before, and it was such a shock. So get started early if that's the pathway you're considering.
Krysten's nodding her head.
Yeah.
I am. I'm like, I actually don't have any more words to add to that. I could add stories, but they're not relevant. Like, yes, get started early.
So what do you all see as the benefits of a military career?
I think that for me, the benefits were and are, I learned self-discipline. I learned problem solving skills, how to think outside the box, like to see a problem not just as what I've been handed, but how that problem then affects the bigger cog, so to speak. And then learning how to work in teams and work in teams effectively, learning how to get outside my comfort zone. So things that maybe don't come naturally to me, getting into those. And so for me, that is, I spent a lot of time, I was a naval engineer and had to talk to a lot of contractors and learn different ships, and talking to contractors who know more than I do, and recognizing that that is a limitation that I have, that because I'm not specialized in all the different types of knowledge, learning how to leverage that and say, okay, tell me how to do this, and reaching out and recognizing that it's okay that I had that limitation, that was why they were there. They were there to help. And so I don't know. I don't know if that is a generational thing, just having a hard time not having all of the info, not being right. Who doesn't want to be right all the time? And realizing that that's okay, that was why we were in a team. So those are just some of the benefits that, I mean, yes, having a consistent pay is nice, and, all of those benefits, and having decent healthcare, and those are also good things. But those were like the character traits that I felt were really beneficial for me.
I agree with everything Krysten just said. The character traits and character development at large is just, there are some of the greatest patriots that I've worked with who have came into military service serious about what they were doing and why they were there. And, you can't help but to admire how patriotic and how values driven these people are. So I guess that would be one example. One benefit is you're exposed to people who will just make you better. Just by mere presence, you will be better because you're around people who have the best interests of the country in mind, who exemplify values, and it helps you grow. It helps you grow yourself to emulate some of those values and some of that patriotism. There's also the fringe benefits like healthcare and a steady job. There's no steadier job than the military service in this world, let me tell you. I'll keep going back to it. There are just opportunities abound. If you are disciplined and you know how to solve problems, you can do and go almost anywhere, because the military will take in numbers, because we need numbers to rightfully defend our country. But the best of us are the ones that learn to solve problems and solve bigger and bigger problems as we go. So learning how to be disciplined, solve those problems, and improve the organization is a major benefit. And then there's always the fact that the military is supposed to be reflective of our society. And coming from rural Alabama, Florida, you don't get a whole lot of view of other cultures. When you're thrown right into the mix and you learn to work as a team with someone from New York or California or Washington and Midwest, all of those differences, you learn to appreciate those differences, but at the same time, those differences start to not matter as much as you might have once thought, because you're forming as a team to work together regardless of your differences. Differences make you better, but they don't actually matter the most. It's accomplishing the mission as a team.
That was so beautifully said. I just love that. Yeah, the only thing I was thinking also to add was that the military sets a high bar and you rise to the occasion. That's if you want to continue to succeed and have a successful career, you rise to the bar rather than trying to bring the bar down to you. So they've got their standards and you rise to meet them.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting comment you made earlier, Krysten, about the thinking outside the box. So maybe I'll just throw out a couple of questions, or even maybe it's just one question, but how can you think outside the box in an organization like that? How does that work when there is that structure in place that you mentioned also? How do those coexist?
So how do you improvise or think outside the box when you're taught to follow the orders and structure?
Yeah.
So I can give you an example. Maybe that's the best
Okay.
way to
Sure.
think of it. It was just something that, as I was talking, I was like, oh, I remember the time when we had a ship that was stranded off the coast of Florida with a broken engine, and they needed a part that was going to have to be dropped to them by helo. So I had to figure out, one, the part was nowhere near Florida, which is where they were. So I had to find the part. Here's another thing to know about the Coast Guard. Most of our ships are antiquated, so they don't make a lot of the parts anymore. So I had to find the part, and then I had to figure out how to get someone to come pick it up where it was and get it onto it ended up having to go on like a 2-seater plane to the point where the helo was, that the helo could then get the part and drop it off, right? So figuring out it's all within the structure of what you can do, but it's, okay, this part, I need this part. This piece has to get there. How do I find it? Okay, well, I can't just drive it down there. I can't just they can't wait 5 days for the plane, on UPS to get there. So how do I improvise within the constructs that I've been given? How do I then say, okay, it's necessary. Like, this is a situation that needs to get there. How do I make sure that it happens?
Okay.
So to that question, the military will teach you your fundamentals. It will when you join the military, you're going to learn the foundation of being in this organization. Just like onboarding with any organization, this is our culture. This is our normal work duty. This is your uniform that you wear. This is how you render respect to superiors. This is how you demand respect from subordinates. You understand that you're part of a hierarchy. All those things are fundamental to the military organization at large. So it's establishing those habits within the organizational construct, right? Now, when it comes to thinking outside the box, the military has this thing called commander's intent and mission intent, where the commander will convey to subordinates and junior leaders, this is what I would like to happen. Kind of like how we do in Kolbe. I want to make our customer experience better. And they will rely on the professional military judgment of the commanders and subordinates beneath them to figure out how to achieve what the commander is asking for. So that's exactly what Krysten was talking about. The intent is to support that ship or that boat out in sea. And Krysten used her best judgment and improvisation to find a solution to that problem that met the intent. So what I would say is the military today is not Nazi Germany or Russia, the Russian military in the 40s in World War II, where you do what I say or you die. It's we're part of a team, we're part of an organization, and I'm going to give you general guidance and objectives to meet, and you do what's necessary to take care of your people in the structure of the military that we've developed in you foundationally to achieve the mission that I'm giving you. And that's what's beautiful about it. There's not one way to get something done. There are many ways to get many things done. It's just using your resources the best in accordance with the intent that you've been given.
That's really impressive, because that's like what all of the, management or organizational books that I've enjoyed talk about is like, if you just have one person who's saying, you do this, you do that, you do that, you're only as good as that one person. Whereas in that method, you suddenly, when you're empowering somebody, like, here's my intent, you figure it out now, then you get to utilize all these different strengths. So that's pretty impressive that they've worked with that.
Of course, there are times where direct leadership is required. When you're in the heat of battle, you need to follow your leader's instructions, because the leader is the nexus of the team, and he's organizing the pieces on the chessboard, so to speak. But 90% of the time it's improv in accordance with intent. And that's where the problem rich environment gives you these opportunities, like, hey, my commander wanted this done. He didn't say how to do it or where to do it and in what way, but I got it done creatively, and that opens up other opportunities for more problems to creatively solve.
Ron, you're so eloquent. That just came across so lovely.
Yes.
What's funny, Krysten, is this wasn't me coming out of high school at all.
Okay.
And so the Army helped develop me into this eloquent speaker and talker and thinker. I would have never gotten that had I just joined the workforce out of high school barely. And what was I was working at a restaurant? I'd probably still be working as some line cook or dishwasher. There's no need for a strategic thinker as a line cook. You just do what you're asked to be done. So the military does afford that benefit.
Yeah. That's funny. That's what my dad was also before he joined the Navy. He was a line cook.
So just like thinking about college or any other path after Kolbe, I find myself wondering the same about the military with regard to, culture, or kind of how our Kolbe students who we've formed through, all these many years, and what that will be like for them going into that environment, just as I would in any other context. So what are your thoughts there?
If you're thinking about it, go to your parish. I guarantee you have veterans in your parish, and seek them out. They're more than likely going to be part of the Knights of Columbus or Catholic Daughters. If you can't find one within your parish to help answer your questions or mentor you in some of these things, then go to a local VFW or any one of these veterans organizations. People are more than happy. They love talking about their military service because it's something to be proud of, and most people are proud of it. There are things that I'm not too proud of in my military service, but overall, my general feeling and sentiment is I'm very proud of it. I'm also very humble and don't talk about it. A lot of people are like that. So in these VFWs and in your parish, they kind of, you have to ask them and pull them out of themselves, because humility is one of those values they've been taught over time. So pull them out, seek them out. They'd be more than happy to talk to you.
It's kind of my experience because my grandfather was in World War II in Korea. My father was actually drafted into the Army in the early 70s, I believe. So very different sort of perspectives there with, but they were always part of like the local American Legion. So they kind of instilled this respect for military, for people who are risking their lives, giving up their lives for our country. And so that was strongly instilled. But then my father also had the experience of being with a bunch of drafted guys going into the Army, and he was kind of like, maybe not the military, but yeah, when you were talking about that though too, John, I remember my wife's grandfather was also in World War II. But it wasn't really until my daughter was even kind of in her teenage years that he started talking about his experience there, which was ended up being wonderful for her. So, and for us too, because she sat down with him, and she was in a journalism class or something and interviewed him, and he was very just talked about everything that had been going on. But it ended up being, I think, good for him as well to have somebody really reach out, because it'd taken years, but then he was able to kind of talk about some of the things.
So especially for the younger or the newer folks to the military ranks, what's it like practicing one's faith?
I would be lying if I didn't say that it was hard, especially in the beginning. And as a, really still a teenager going to college and having somewhat of a college experience, it can be hard. That first year at the academy, Sundays are like your only days to relax. And so they're in the summertime, it was like the only time that you got to go anywhere else was when you went to church. So in the summer, they saw a huge influx, and then it drops off during the year because it was the only time that Reveille didn't play at 6 o'clock in the morning. So they would sleep in, right? And it's that temptation is there. And I think the stronger your foundation, the easier it is to continue to follow your faith. It really doesn't matter what you do after high school. You have to own your faith. So if you are just not strong and you go to a regular college and don't do the military, you're still going to find that to be a temptation. So I'm not sure that the military is different or unique in that. I think that Kolbe education as a whole sets you up for great structure and following, set pathways. I think that the military has made a shift in recent years, even since I got out, away from using being accepting of faith within the everyday. So yes, there are chapels on the base and you will find good communities there. But when you are new and maybe don't have a family yet, I think those students may find that it's more challenging than they expected. Because there is that, it's almost like a taboo. You don't mention religion in the office. And I don't think it was like that when my grandfathers were in. Maybe if John, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think that Krysten, what you said, you have to be deliberate, and you have to own your faith if you want it to survive military service. Maybe that's not the right way of putting it either, but you have to own your faith, and you have to seek it out. You need to go into it understanding that the military is different than the corporate world. There are no such thing as accommodations for you to take the holy day of obligation off to go to church. If you have a mission, then the mission comes first. There's also no real expectation of having weekends if you have something else going on. So working weekends, you're basically a salaried soldier. And if I have to work weekends and I have to work late at night, you just need to prepare yourself for that. But like Krysten said, in colleges, you would have to do the same thing. And they have Newman centers around all around. A lot of my friends and family with kids discerning college, that's one of their major asks is, do you have a Newman center and are you a Newman Guide college? So at least that way you go in with the expectation that there are some type of religious accommodations for your faith. In the military, the way that it presents itself is there is a chapel on every military base, and each unit is typically afforded a chaplain. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a Catholic priest or a Protestant pastor. It comes in all shapes and sizes because you have backgrounds of all faiths. But generally there is always a chapel on every military base you're going to go to where you can go and exercise your faith, typically on Sundays. If you're of the Islamic faith, I think that in Jewish faith, they accommodate for that as well, for different days of worship. Like Krysten said, I came up in a generation where you didn't talk about money, politics, or religion, right? Those are things that you kept to yourself. So it's akin to the don't ask, don't tell policies of the 90s. And you face that today anywhere you go. Just don't talk about religion, because you're just inviting the devil to present himself through other people in other ways. But still make an effort, still own it, still go out there and do it, because you have to be a soldier for Christ. If that's who you are, and if that's the type of person you want to be, you got to own it, and you got to go seek it out. There are things available for you to exercise your faith, but also understand that there's not an expectation that it's not going to be on your terms, but it'll be on the military's terms.
Yep. I don't know, John, when you deploy, when we get underway, we don't get underway with a chaplain. So we do Sunday service, and it's usually, there's sometimes a trained lector that can at least do the readings, but like we didn't have the Eucharist underway.
Right.
So and it's, carrying a rosary in your pocket and wearing your cross around your neck, but tucked into your uniform, small things that can keep God close within the constructs, I guess, of the
Right. The every and I can only really say this from the point of view of the Army. I know that we have an organization whose job it is to determine the requirements for chaplains in every unit. At what place in the organizational hierarchy do we place a chaplain to cover this many people in this type of mission? So the higher I've been fortunate enough to deploy with several chaplains who I consider very close friends that were one was Methodist and one was Lutheran, and their given job is to be that pastor or to be a priest if you have a Catholic priest with you. But the job on the ground is to be a counselor. So they're there to help you through issues and problems of exercising and dealing with your faith. So they're there to act as a counselor and a friend. And I think that's beautiful, right? You could always turn to your priest when you're in need of a friend or in your need of help, wherever they may be.
When you're saying that, it made me think of, what like either missionaries or people, we're so lucky normally in America here in most areas where you do have a church that's there in you, you can easily drive to and receive the sacraments at least every Sunday. But I guess that wasn't always the case, especially before cars and things like that, where you might be too far. So I guess it's important to keep that in mind, I guess, if you're going into the military, that you're going to have to do your best, and it's not necessarily just going to be as easy as it was before.
And if you're strong in your faith and you're serious about your faith, then there are prayers that you say in the absence of being able to receive the Eucharist, right? I've had to do that many times. Think about what we did during COVID, where we weren't allowed to go to in-person services. There were a lot of things we had to improvise on, given the environment. You face those same challenges no matter where you're at, but the majority of the time you're at a location where you can access routine services, routine Catholic services, and receive the sacraments.
Okay, well, Krysten, you mentioned this earlier about how Kolbe would kind of serve well someone who has gone into military service. Would you expound on that a bit? What would a student who has come up, someone with this Kolbe education, what about military service would be appealing, familiar? How would Kolbe serve that person entering that next phase of life?
Sure. I really think the classical model of education fits well with the military. Classical schooling teaches you not what to think, but how to think. And I think that foundation is it's perfect for the military. It lines up really well. And Kolbe especially, I feel like the discipline that you need as a homeschool student to get through your studies will benefit you really no matter what you choose, but it definitely will benefit you to be disciplined in the military, no matter what route you take to get into the military. And even just some of the subjects that you will study will help you to maybe understand a little bit of how like the inner workings work with the military, right? Like even just studying some of that whole phrase, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Students get a really good basis with Kolbe education, understanding history. And that does play into the military, because that's exactly what the military is trying to not do, is repeat mistakes of the past and to train and to be ready. So I do think that it just really sets you up well.
Yes, if anything, the military strives to be historically informed, as that's what Krysten was saying, historically informed of both culture and past wars. So if you don't know what culture you're working with, because we're a global military these days. If you don't know what culture you're dealing with and their history, then you're going to face a lot of other challenges that you may not anticipate. I think Kolbe's education is second to none because it teaches you gives you an opportunity to learn how to think and not what to think. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs in the military where if you know the type of technology or specific skill you want to grow into, you can go into that. If you want to learn to be in cybersecurity or IT or 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 anything, logistics, you can learn how to do those things because they're going to teach you what to do in those instances. But if you want to be a professional military soldier, then understanding how to think in historical context, giving your current environmental context as well, you're going to be so much more equipped, better equipped to handle any problems that you face, both culturally and bureaucratically, organizationally.
Okay. Well, as we're coming to the end of this first episode in this series, Krysten, as a Kolbe advisor, what might you leave with students who are interested in investigating this path further?
So, for those who are interested in investigating whether a military career might be something that they want to pursue, I do recommend you can either walk into a recruiter's office and get more information, but just start researching. And don't just look at if you say, okay, well, I want to go into the Air Force. Well, there are actually pilots in all of the forces. So go look at every single branch and look to see what their requirements are. Look to see what you want to do. And it might be different, right? So I said in the beginning that I joined the Coast Guard wanting to be a marine biologist. My degree is in electrical engineering. So just because you start out that way doesn't mean you'll end up that way. But so start to do there. If you're interested in an academy, every single academy has that program that I did for the Coast Guard Academy between your junior and your senior year. Look into it, apply to them. Even if it's maybe not an academy that's the top of your list, try to see if you can go there just to look into it and continue to work hard on your studies. Prioritizing good grades might be worth it. I'm not saying that it's the only thing. If you are doing your best, that's the most important thing. But maybe not giving a half effort.
Okay, super. John, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I like when Krysten said that there are pilots in all services because there's a flip side to that as well. Sometimes people get this idea that I'm going to join the Air Force because I want to fly, but that's a small fraction of the Air Force because there's a larger tail that supports those pilots. So if you're interested in the military service and you have a certain set of skills or dreams or desires, then you need to research the different career fields that the services can offer you. If I wanted to fly helicopters, rotary wing aircraft, then you could go into any service. There are just different ways of getting to that. Each service is different. I could go directly out of high school into a flight program with the Army. Whereas if I joined the Marines, you would have to be a Marine first, and you have to go through this whole large process. The military recognizes that it has a problem in recruiting because they have this issue that's arising. I don't think it's a real issue. It's just the nature of our cultures across the states is that you're more inclined to join the military if you have if your parent is of the military. So like my kids would be more inclined to join the military. And that's creating what they've termed a caste system type problem in military discernment. I would just say it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be families of service members in this lineage of people who have served. Seek somebody out who knows or has experience, whether it's good or bad, because you could learn from both. The bad experiences of those who were drafted into Vietnam informed those who joined as part of the all volunteer force in the 80s and still reverberate today. You're going to have to, I keep giving the same about, you're just going to have to embrace the problems that you're presented with, because there are going to be many, and there are new problems compounding daily with our current set of cultural issues. You're just going to have to embrace some of those problems and hold true to yourself. Stop at a recruiter. You have to understand a recruiter is like a car salesman. They're trying to make the sale, and they're going to tell you, they're not going to lie to you, but they're not going to tell you the bad that goes along with it. Their job is to sell the service. So if you go into it informed of the mindset that they're trying to sell you on something, just remain skeptical and think about what they're selling. Don't just go, hey, I want to be in the Air Force, and only go talk to the Air Force recruiter like I did with the Army. Go talk to multiple, see what they have to offer, and see what they have to say about the other services. Sometimes that's more illuminating, because, oh, well, he's going to offer you this, but I can offer you this. You're shopping for a car. You're shopping for a career at this point. So stay true to yourself, stay true to your faith. Go find some people who have been there, whether good or bad, and shop around. Don't take the first job that you're offered like I did. It worked out well for me, but I can't say that it worked out well for everyone. Like Krysten was saying, she's an electrical engineer by education. I started out in avionics, a support person on aircraft. I ended up as a warrant officer in communications, but mostly as a strategist writing for the military. And before that was presidential duty, which you can't train for that. You grow into something like that. So just take those initial jobs with a grain of salt, because they could lead to many other possible futures and other possible careers. Use your advisors. Call us. We'll talk to you about it if you're thinking about it, or if you're a parent. If you're a parent who has a child thinking about it, set up an advisor appointment, and we can just talk to you about it. And the benefit of that is you have the added benefit of being able to look at your students' records and what classes they're doing well in or not, and help form a pathway together. I do think it is better overall if the parent isn't not necessarily controlling, but is involved in the process. Your job as a parent is to grow your student and be prepared for that handoff, to best prepare them for that handoff into adulthood. So do it together. Make sure you're both on the same sheet of music, and set up an appointment with your advisor. Krysten's phone is standing by.
I love it. Well, John and Krysten, thank you so much for coming to share your experience with us and your wisdom that you've gleaned over the years and through all your service. And we so appreciate that. And this time you spent with us. We will have some links in our show notes as usual for things that came up today. Thanks again, you two. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam.